Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. A warm welcome to all of you on behalf of Team Wealth Creators Financial Advisor. And thank you for making this on Saturday evening. Through this webinar, I and Vineet would like to take an opportunity to share that our firm, Wealth Creator Financial Advisor, has completed 5 years on 1st of September 2020. As I speak to you, we are managing now 305 families across 6 countries, and we are managing close to 2,100 financial goals for our clients, and the asset under advisory is now close to 105 crores. The last 5 years has been an enriching and fulfilling experience and journey for all of us. It has also given us an immense learning opportunities and experiences because of difficult market conditions. Obviously, we all know what happened in equity markets and debt markets in recent past. Economic challenges were adding to these problems, and obviously on our side, we faced a lot of regulatory challenges as well. And as recent as something like pandemic, which was never seen in our lifetime. However, all throughout, you all have stood with us with your trust, confidence, and commitment. And that is what we as an advisor to you feel very grateful about. Also, it leaves us with strong sense of achievement and pride today. Thank you all for being part of this incredible journey for the last 5 years. Without taking too much of time, I would like to introduce Mr. Amit Trivedi, who is our guest speaker for the evening. The topic of the webinar today is It's All in the Mind and How to Be a Better Investor. Just to give an introduction about Mr. Amit Trivedi, he is an industry veteran with more than 26 years of experience, professional experience in capital markets across many companies that he has worked with. Now he is an author, speaker, trainer, and a blogger. Trained more than 1 lakh participants like us through 1,321 workshops, okay, with 130 different locations across this country. So that's a huge achievement for Mr. Amit Trivedi after he started his journey as an author, speaker, trainer, and blogger after his job. He's been writing very actively with Times of India, Business Standards, Outlook Money, Mumbai Samachar, Midday, Money Control, Morning Star, Bloomberg, and has published almost 750 articles so far. Last but not the least, he is an author of 4 bestseller books with CNBC TV 18. The books are Riding the Roller Coaster Ride, Personal Finance Lessons from the ICU, the whole thing that is Sabse Bada Rupaiya, and Investories. With this, I think without taking time, I would hand over the session to Mr. Amit Trivedi. Welcome, sir, and I think it's all yours. You can start with the experience now. Thank you so much.
Great. Thanks, Manoj, for this wonderful introduction, and both Vineet and you for inviting me for today's session. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you so much for joining us on this Saturday. A few days ago, Vineet got in touch with me and said, let's do a session for our investors, and they've been investing with us for a reasonable period of time. So let's pick up a topic that could be of interest to this group of investors. And in the discussion, we thought, why not take up something which impacts everybody? And whatever number of times we touch upon this topic, it may not be enough. And I'm particularly speaking from my experience as well as my reading of various events that have spanned across last 500 years in the financial markets. So when you read literature and see what happens, some amazing things come up. And today morning, I was just going through one article which appeared in 2017. Uh, Again, very relevant for today's program. And it says that historically, whatever returns the markets have delivered is one thing. And academicians and people who love number crunching and data crunching would love to highlight that the markets have appreciated at such and such rate over such and such period. So if we look at Indian history, Sensex has delivered roughly 16% over last 40 years, 16% per annum compounded annually. The question is how many investors could benefit out of that 16% growth rate? And there the author of that article says, it's not so much about what the markets have done in the past. It is a lot more about what the investor has done during that phase. And the reason why investors take certain decisions or actions, to a great extent, it is to do with our own mind, our own emotions, and various emotions, to positive and negative, that play out in this phase. So let's start with that background. But before we go further, I would like to start with what the whole mutual fund industry is notorious for. Mutual funds normally start with a disclaimer. They start with risk factors. So I'm also starting with some sort of a disclaimer, that my sincere apologies, because we are talking about the tricks that the mind plays. It is possible that somebody may feel that I am referring to something that might have happened in your life. The idea is not to point out anybody's mistakes. The idea is to look at what can happen and what could have happened. Some of the mistakes that I'm going to talk about today, I have done. I have been through those mistakes. And if time permits and if my memory allows, I'll narrate some of those personal experiences also. It's just that things do keep happening, and that's where I thought, let me start with an apology. But from that, let's go back to something that happens almost every single year. And I've asked this question to a lot of people in many programs. How do you explain this statement? Now, a lot of people said, on what basis do you say this? I said, that's exactly what I'm trying to find out. There is a basis. So then the answers start pouring in. And a lot of times people come up with the answers that, March typically, February, March typically is the month of exams for the school kids. Somebody would say that this is the period where the account books are closed. Somebody would say that I have to pay my taxes or file, the accounting year gets over. So various things have to be completed before that year. Those who are in sales would say that, the year gets over, so annual targets have to be achieved. Different people come with different perspectives. And those who are watching the financial markets go one step further and say in February and March, the union budget is presented. Different people would come up with different perspectives. Now, the true reason why I say this is very, very different from whatever I just mentioned. And I've hardly come across this reason in any of the programs. It has a lot to do with one of the incorrect ways of looking at one particular financial instrument available for all of us: buying life insurance policies. Life insurance policies are supposed to be bought as a protection against untimely death of the bread earner in a family. If that's the case, how do we justify that the largest number of life insurance policies are purchased during February and March only, year after year? Well, so it has nothing to do with why insurance is bought. It has everything to do with the fact that there is a tax deduction available on buying that insurance policy. You see, there is an instrument, financial instrument called life insurance that is required, but the reason why it is required versus the reason why it is purchased, there is a gap. And you know, in that process, what happens is, let's understand the two major aspects of life insurance policies. Number one, there is a risk premium that you do pay, the premium that we pay every year. And there is a risk cover that we get in return. So I might have bought a risk cover worth 1 crore of rupees by paying a premium which is much smaller than that 1 crore, depending on which policy one buys, depending on the age, health condition, etc., etc. But whatever the situation, the premium paid per year is a fraction of the risk cover. My purpose is to protect my family members in case of my untimely death. And in that case, I should be looking at the risk cover. But if my purpose is saving taxes, then Section 80C links the tax saving with the premium paid and not the risk cover. And in that process, a significantly large number of Indians who have bought life insurance policies are underinsured tax savers. They've been able to save the tax, objective achieved. Is the risk cover sufficient? No. Let's look at another similar case under the same section of Income Tax Act called Section 80C. And this product comes from a related industry called mutual fund industry. I picked up data from the Association of Mutual Funds in India, and there for a certain period, I mean, I could update the data, I've not updated the data, but doesn't really matter. Month after month, how much money is invested in this particular product. Again, ELSS, Equity Linked Savings Scheme, is eligible investment under Section 80C for the same tax benefit called deduction from the income. So now in that case, how much money is invested in this scheme? If I were to look at that, look at this chart. Gross inflow basically means how much money is invested, and I'm not adjusted for the money that went out, the redemptions, because redemptions is not. This pipe that you see ever is of March. So ELSS is a mutual fund which invests in equity, and equity is typically bought for the purpose of achieving long-term financial goals or for the purpose of achieving wealth creation goals. And still, is the market always on the lower side in March? No, not really. But a lot of money pours in during that period. If that's the case, it's important to think here, stop here and think what's going on. Let's get an example, and this happened during my college years. I was studying in city far from my hometown. Of course, I was not staying in a hostel. We were living as paying guests at a place. The incident that I'm narrating is about the final year exam, 8th semester exam in the engineering college. And on day one of our very good friends, he was feeling worse. So early in the morning, he came to our place, and he started, venting out all his emotions. And he said, I've lost hope and stuff like that. Athar is a brilliant student. So what do college students do typically in such case? He said, come, let's go down and have a cup of tea. So we went down to nearest Chai Ka Tapri to have a cup of tea. And we said, we'll just sit there for a while, cheer him up, because on the last day, what else can you do? He said, we'll cheer him up. And and again, he was from a different team. So we could not even help him in his studies. So we just wanted to do a pep talk and went there. The guy was so nervous that his hand was shaking while having tea, and he dropped the teacup. I mean, it was even more difficult to then counsel him. But something magical happened that day. That day's exam paper, he did phenomenally well. And by evening, his confidence was back that, I cracked it. Then for the next 5 exam days, every morning he came to our place, he pulled us down, we went to the same chai ka tapri. Every day he paid 5 rupees to the chai wala and broke a cup. Because on day 1, by breaking the cup, he did well in the exam. Incidentally, as the number 1 suggests in the number 1 is mentioned in the middle, he topped the exam and eventually went on to win the gold medal for that year. Now, what's the link between breaking a teacup and topping a final year engineering exam? And still, at least during that exam, that was a very sort of comforting or consoling point for him that he broke the cup on the next 5 days so that he did well in the exam. We somehow try to link often uncorrelated events. And this is precisely what you see happening almost every opportunity in the financial markets. Will there be a pre-budget rally? Will there be a pre-budget crash? Will there be a post-budget rally? Will there be a post-budget crash? Ditto for elections. And now anyway, we are in September. 3 months later, there is Christmas. And ever since FII came to India, I've been hearing this story that in Christmas, FII managers will go for vacation, so the markets will crash. Somebody comes up with a counter theory. He says in Christmas, the FIIs have to close their books of accounts, so they would like to shore up the NAV. That's why the markets would go up in December. You keep hearing 2 opposite theories, and interestingly, with so much data available, it is easy to come up with a theory and then justify that theory with whatever numbers that you want. But the funny thing out here is nobody has been able to establish a link, logical link between any of these events and the financial markets. Number 2, a few years ago, I was just trying to, research, or rather not research. I mean, research is not really the right word, but trying to find out if somebody has done some study on these kind of events or not. And I came across a term on one of the very popular investing websites, global investing websites, called Santa Claus Rally. Now, the Santa Claus Rally is what they refer to, what happens in the markets during the Christmas period. So just a few days before Christmas, the markets rally, and then in January they come down, something of that sort. Some such story was being talked about. They said there is a rally when Santa Claus comes. Well, you dig deeper, somebody had written an article on that Santa Claus rally and justified. And here is the funny part. Look at the justification. The justification said, during winter months, bears go into hibernation, and that's why there is a rally in financial markets. No, bear, the animal, goes into hibernation is something that's known. But the bear of the capital markets or the stock markets, that bear has nothing to do with that bear that goes into hibernation. But just because the same word is used, somebody came up with this kind of a justification also. And that's where let's remember the wise words of William Bernstein. Bernstein is considered to be one of the finest investors and finest authors on the subject of investment. He's written some wonderful books. He said it's human nature to find patterns where there are none, and to find skill where luck is a more likely explanation. So let's not get into the second part of it, but the first part is it's human nature to find patterns where there are none. In all the three examples that we just discussed, when you see a pattern, try to find out whether that pattern is repeatable, whether that pattern has any logic behind it. In the absence of any logic, the whole premise could be on a very weak foundation. And if you take any action on basis of that premise, you're likely to end up on the losing side. And that's where understanding the basic fundamentals of any investment would become very, very important. Now, when it comes to understanding the fundamentals, there are two sides of any coin when it comes to investing. The one side is the return and the second side is the risk. And both need to be understood properly. With that, let's take equity as an example. And this session is not about promoting a particular investment avenue or a particular asset category or nothing of that sort. I'm only taking equity markets as example simply because the behavior or emotions or responses get magnified at the extremes. And equity market is one place where you see more extreme events more frequently. So that's why I'm taking equity market as just an example. So what is the nature of equity as an asset class? Around 110, 115 years ago, John Pierpont Morgan, the person, he was also known as JP Morgan Senior, the person who started JP Morgan and Company. He was asked, and incidentally in 1907, there was a major crash in the US equity markets, and JP Morgan single-handedly bailed out. And the moment he extended his support, the markets recovered. So that's and then he became a legend after that. So at some point in time, he was asked, what do you think of stock prices? And his answer was as true then as it is today. And he said the prices will fluctuate. Now, this is the nature of equity markets. Incidentally, I'll extend it further to say that any open market where a large number of participants can come and transact on the basis of their opinions, you will see the prices fluctuating. And I emphasized on the word opinions simply because it need not be knowledge. The opinions could be driven by knowledge, understanding, wisdom, or opinion could be in the absence of all the three terms that I just mentioned. The opinion could also be driven by the emotions of hope, greed, fear, envy. There could be any reason to form that opinion. And we'll just look at this opinion once again in a while from now. To put it in a more practical way, equity has the potential to deliver investment returns which are higher than inflation even after payment of taxes. So you pay taxes on the investment returns, and whatever you get net of tax, that is also, that also could be potentially higher than inflation. The word potential is where a lot of things happen. There is no guarantee. It has the potential, but because there is no guarantee, there is an uncertainty. And that uncertainty is also known as risk. What if I'm expecting X and I get Y? That's risk. Now this Y could be less than X or Y could be more than X. This Y could be below zero also. Possible. But very few assets have the potential to beat inflation after adjustment of taxes. Equity is one of those assets. The moment that happens, the moment post-tax returns are higher than inflation, the purchasing power of the currency goes up. And that is, in another words, called creation of wealth. So my wealth goes up when I am able to purchase more. That's possible through investment in equity. And that's why a lot of financial advisors generally recommend investment in equity. Yeah. And this is an incomplete statement, by the way. I'll complete it in a while. But the problem is, while the long-term potential could be good, strong, powerful, beneficial, the short-term volatility often outweighs that long-term potential, and that's where the benefit is ignored. Now, this year has been a fantastic year once again, and today we are talking. We're talking on the Teachers' Day. My sense is this year once again taught us the lesson which many of us had forgotten. I got a call from somebody in sometime in early April, and as those of you who are investing know for sure that towards the end of March, the equity markets had fallen by a significant margin. In comparison to the January highs, the March lows were roughly 33 or 35% down. A huge drop in a very short span of time, 14th January to I think 22nd or 23rd March or something of that sort. So in a very short period of time, there was a significant drop. Somebody called me in first week of April and said, look at the long-term returns from equity. I've lost faith in equity. And this guy happens to be, or rather at one point in time, he was a senior to me in the same organization. He spent more time in the financial markets than I have spent. And this guy calls me and says, so I was like wondering what is happening. And of course, there are many others who had expressed similar thoughts in various interactions. When I looked at the whole thing, I realized something was wrong somewhere. Between 2009, January 2010 and December 2019. So if you take the 10-year period, in the entire 10-year period, there was not a single incident where equity markets had fallen by 30% or more. Not even once in a decade. Has it happened prior to that? Yes. So in 2020, the fall, which was around 35%, was the 7th instance in the history of Sensex. So from 79 to 2009, in those 30 years, 6 times there was a more than 30% fall. And then came a decade where you don't see a single fall of 30%. In fact, if I look at furthermore, then the volatility measures were also muted. So suddenly over a 10-year period, equity lost its volatility. And then suddenly it was hugely visible in February and March 2020. So some lessons we had forgotten were reminded. We were just brought back to our senses that, okay, this is the true nature of equity markets. Face it. And that's where this one particular equation that explains the relation between risk and reward must be carefully understood. Many of us have heard this equation called high risk, high reward. Unfortunately, the moment you hear high risk, high reward, the mind interprets this as, if I take high risk, I should get high returns. So let's look at this whole equation in the right context. And I'm using a slightly weird analogy in this case, though it is not entirely correct, but it's just to explain the relation between risk and reward. So I'm saying this is a standard thing that can be said said for a lot of people, that I want the upside, but I'm not ready to take the downside. I'm not prepared. Is there a, and I keep getting this question very often. Recently in a media event, somebody asked this question to me, that interest rates have gone down on fixed deposits. So is there any investment avenue where I can earn 10 or 11% return without taking any risk? Yeah, so a lot of people have this desire to seek higher rewards without taking risk. The fact of the matter is, the moment you seek higher rewards, you got to take risk. So I'm turning that high risk, high reward equation by saying it is high reward, then you need to take high risk. Without that, it's not going to come. And the flip side to that is, just because somebody has taken risk doesn't mean that one would get high returns. So this equation, I would simply put it as, instead of saying high risk, high return, I would say, let's see high return, high risk, or low risk, low return. Yeah. So let's come back to the nature of equity markets. And the nature of equity markets says that, and this is from the guru of investing, Benjamin Graham, who was a professor at Columbia University. He wrote two classic books. So one is called Security Analysis, which he wrote with a co-professor, David Dodd. So that Graham and Dodd's book, Security Analysis, which was written in 1930s, I don't remember the exact year, I think it was 1934, is even today considered as the textbook on investing. His most famous student just turned 90 years a few days ago. So Warren Buffett learned from Benjamin Graham how to invest. So this comes from Benjamin Graham. He says, in the short run, the market is a voting machine. In the long run, it is a weighing machine. So what happens in a voting machine is, a large number of people vote on the basis of their opinions. And all of us know how voting happens in the elections. How many people have done any research on the candidates contesting in that election? Well, I don't want to give the answer. Many of us know the answer. And still we go out and vote. Why? Because I've heard something, this guy has done something good, but this guy has done something good does not mean that another guy may not have done something even better. But it's just that I've not heard about that guy. Or someone represents a particular party, various reasons, or it could be social pressure. In financial markets, when somebody is buying or selling, what are the motivators behind that buying and selling? Is it only specific to that particular company? Is it only specific to that particular stock? Or it could also be that I want to liquidate some of my holdings because I need some money. Or I've got some surplus money and I simply want to play around. There could be many reasons, logical, illogical, or somewhere in between. However, Graham says, in the long run, stock market is a weighing machine, and this weight is nothing but the profitability and the profit growth of the company. So long as the companies continue to increase their profit over a long period, the investment returns are more likely to be positive. However, in the short run, what happens is, it may not be anything to do with the company. It may have something to do with the investors at large. Let me take a couple of examples from recent times. Tesla Motors, which is Elon Musk's company, that electric car manufacturing company. suddenly, as the world started talking about this pandemic and what harm we've done to the environment, and then suddenly ESG, the environment, social and governmental issues became more prominent. People said, okay, electric car is the future, and Tesla Motors share started moving up, which is okay, understandable. There's a theory, there's a logic behind it. But Tesla, its stock ticker symbol on the on the New York Stock Exchange is TSLA. Tesla TSLA. There is another company listed on New York Stock Exchange, and this is a Taiwanese semiconductor, some semiconductor company or something like that. A Taiwanese company whose ticker symbol is TLSA. So TSLA versus TLSA, and that Taiwanese company stock also zoomed up, and it had nothing to do with that company's fundamentals. And when I said zoomed up, Zoom, the platform that we are using right now, that company's shares went up because of the increased usage and subscription to Zoom. But there was another company by the same name, Zoom, and the other part of the name was different. I don't really recall the full name. That company's shares actually for a brief period delivered more return than the Zoom, that the platform company that we are using right now. Voting machine. It had nothing to do with what the company does. However, there are enough number of examples where over a longer period of time, only the good companies have survived. So be very, very careful. If that's the case, what you need to do is something different. Let's come back to psychology, and I'll touch upon that part, what you need to do as a good investor. But before then, I'll go back again on a fictional journey of an investor. The journey started, and it's a random period. Journey started sometime in January 2003, 1st January 2003. And we ended the journey on 30th June 2014. So somebody may say, why that period? As I said, it's randomly picked up, and the investor is fictional. The market numbers are correct. So let's see what happened. On 1st January 2003, this investor invested 1 lakh rupees in an investment avenue known as Nifty. And then, like many investors, this investor also turned out to be initially unlucky. And from the day he invested, the market started going down. And in no time, so before 5 months were over, 1 lakh had gone down to roughly 85,000 rupees. Then it started going up again, and by 30th June, it was back to roughly 1 lakh. So 6 months holding period, 1st January to 30th June, and you are only breaking even, you not made any profit, any loss, and in between you only seen a lower value. And during such period, the investor is likely to feel that I should have got into something that generated positive returns. And many times I've seen this, and in fact, yesterday I was talking to somebody, and he said some of the best mutual fund schemes, when they were launched, they happened to be launched at a certain level, after which the markets started going down. And when the 10 rupees went down, people were really upset. However, after going down, when NAV came back closer to 10 rupees, then a very large number of people started exiting. So what happens at this stage is people start comparing the historical performance of this particular investment with the current interest rate in fixed deposits. And they would say, I should have been better off in fixed deposit. Let me get out now that I'm not making any losses. But in between, along the way, I don't want to book the losses. But now I'm breaking even, let me get out. Since this is a fictional story, let us continue to assume that this investor did not exit and stayed invested. So what happened from this period onwards was that this 1 lakh rupee went to roughly 6,20,000 or so. So more than 6 times over the next, so this is 3 to January 2008. So around 4.5 years, it just zoomed by a little more than 6 times. And you've seen this period. This was the rally that we saw a few years ago, something that we had not seen for a while. And it was a reasonably broad-based rally compared to the one that happened prior to that. But along the way, once again, what thoughts go into the mind are, when one leg becomes 2 legs, or one becomes 3, then the mind starts wondering, how can it happen in such a short period of time? I mean, in this case, the money has doubled in less than, it's a little more than a year and a half. How can this happen so fast? Let me book profits. Let me get out of it. Assume that the investor did not get out and stayed invested till this period. And at this period, now the thought in the mind is, you see, I was a smart investor. Didn't I tell you this was going to be one of the finest bull markets? And let me put more money into the investment. These thoughts are not made up. These are out of experience. Let me just highlight that at this stage, one event happened in the financial markets, in the Indian financial markets, and that event found its place in the Limca Book of Records. The number of new Demat accounts opened in a single month. And if you remember that particular event, this was the period, February 2008, when the Reliance Power IPO came, and a large number of first-time investors wanted to participate in that IPO. So we've seen that. Now, what does it signify? It simply signifies that at this stage, whatever be the reason, the mood of people was extremely exuberant. Unfortunately, the next few years were really horrible, and this is where we saw the market stumbling by a little more than 50%. This 6,27,000 did not return to 6,27,000 for some period. Sometime in November 2010 it came back, then again sometime in I think December 2012 it came back to that level, then again it went back. Now think about this kind of period. These are the, somebody would say, this has gone back to all-time high, it can't go further up, let me get out. And if somebody did not come out, then this 627 went up to 817 by 30th June 2014. Not easy journey. While in 11.5 years, the money went up by 8.27 times, which is a significant upside. But the journey that one had to take was a bumpy road. Just to put it in a light vein, 1 lakh became 817. So it is equivalent to, instead of buying a Swift Desire, had somebody invested, not Desire, Swift, if somebody invested that money into this, then 11.5 years later, the money could have bought Audi A4. But the road is very bumpy. The falls, the wait periods are not easy. And if that's not easy, what should an investor do? So this is exactly how the markets function. And I've deliberately chosen a period where you saw this kind of things, you saw this kind of things, deliberately chosen, though I said random, I wanted to, exhibit that markets have gone through such ups and downs, and they would continue to go in future also. What's the problem? Oh, some text is missing here. Anyway, the point that I was making on this particular slide, I don't know how certain things disappeared, but the point that I was making is, in order to create wealth, one has to stay invested for a long period. The temporary downturns is something that we have to withstand. But in order to create that wealth, and exploit the power of equity markets, a few conditions apply. And the conditions are, number one, it has to be a diversified portfolio of good quality stocks. Now, somebody would say, okay, so buying stocks is a good idea. Yes, investing in equity is a good idea. But there are two ways to invest in equity. One is you build a portfolio yourself. The second is you take professional help. And that professional help can come in form of professional fund managers, which is nothing but mutual funds. The difference between the two is, if I have to build a portfolio of stocks myself, I got to understand the business of the company's ability to remain profitable over long periods of time. The weighing machine must come in. So I must know that this is a weighing machine and this is a solid weighing machine. However, in spite of doing that in-depth research, I could be wrong in my assessment, or I might have ignored some facts, or I may not have known some facts. And in that case, diversification is the rescue. Good quality comes first and then diversification. And mutual funds typically give you this combination. The second condition is a growing economy. The period that we are talking about, or the 40 years, 1979 to now, we've seen a growing economy in spite of the recent fall in the GDP numbers. If you look at the overall numbers, so this was one blip in 40 years. Economy has generally grown year after year, or even quarter after quarter. Growing economy, second condition. Third condition, reasonable to low valuation at the time of buying. So even if there is a growth ahead, but if you bought costly, you paid a high price, then your investment returns would be lower than what happens in the market. If you have bought cheaper, your investment returns would be higher than what happens in the companies. And the fourth condition, and that's well, it's patience, and it never comes early. It takes time, but we need loads of patience. And that loads of patience, as Warren Buffett says, how powerful that patience is. He says stock market is a device for transferring wealth from the people who are impatient to the people who are patient. Let's look at what happened to Mr. Buffett. Some numbers, and recently, because anyway, he celebrated his 90th birthday, a lot of numbers have once again started making rounds. At 34, his total net worth was 3.4 million US dollars. At 55, it was 1.4 billion US dollars. And at 88, it was 85.9 billion dollars. I don't have the updated numbers, so I've just used the old numbers. But 1.4 to 85.9. In other words, one can say that he created more than 98% of wealth, or accumulated 98% of his wealth after the age of 55 years. And as we know, he started investing at the age of 11. So what has worked really in his case? Number one, he started very early. Number two, he chose right investments. Number three, he stuck to those investments. He stayed invested through the thick and thin. He did not disturb the power of compounding. He did not interrupt this power of compounding. This is an equation that we studied in, I think, 6th or 7th or 8th standard mathematics. The amount accumulated over a period is equal to the amount invested multiplied by 1 plus rate of return raised to the power of number of compounding periods. And in this entire equation, the most powerful variable on the right hand side is the N. Now, look at the three variables on the right hand side. The one on the left hand side, the amount, is the goal. How much do we want to accumulate? Now, this accumulation could be, I want to accumulate so much wealth, or it could be for the purpose of funding a goal in my life. Whatever the reason, that's my goal value, target value. And for that, I got three right hand side. How much I can invest, How much rate of return can I get, and how much, or rather, how long can I stay invested? And if you look at P, R, and N, between the three, P is in our control to a reasonable extent, N is in our control to a reasonable extent, R is almost entirely out of our control. If that's the case, what should the focus be on, P, N, or R? In case of Mr. Buffett, he played on P and N and tried to look at another R, not the R of return. He tried to keep the R of risk on a lower side. In a lot of cases, we try to increase the R of return. Whether the R of return goes up or not, remember the risk reward equation, the R of risk definitely goes up. And that's where the magic happens. Just a few numbers. 10,000 invested over a 20-year period at 8% would grow to around 47,000, 46 and a half, which means over a 20-year period, one would accumulate earning of around 37,000, 36 and a half. So this is the earning, 10,000 plus this much makes it 47,000. However, when you move from 20-year to 30-year, look at the accumulation. Accumulation is now 1 lakh plus, which means the wealth increased by 54,000, which means what you accumulated in first 20 years, in half the period subsequently, you accumulated a little more than that, simply because there's nothing, no magic. It is just that the power of compounding ensures that over the later years, the rate at which you keep earning goes significantly up. And then if you go from 30 to 35, now this is a 5-year period, and the amount you amount by which you increase your worth is 47,000, which is the total accumulation including the principal in the first 20 years. So 46 versus 47. And look at this power. And that's where the N becomes extremely, extremely important. However, that N requires patience. And what happens to the patience? Let's look at some simple examples. And most of us, of course, last 6 months have been a different experience altogether for most of us. We don't travel. But if you go out on the roads, how often have you seen people honking in a traffic jam as if the person ahead of us is interested in remaining stuck in the traffic? He doesn't want to move, and that's why we honk. I've seen a lot of people honking in front of a red light, and the traffic signal is so stubborn that in spite of incessant honking, it doesn't turn green. It will only take its own time and turn green. And the worst example that I've seen of impatience is when in my hometown in Ahmedabad, now anyway things are changing, but earlier we used to have those railway crossings. Most of us are familiar with those railway crossings when the railways pass through the city. And I've seen people honking in front of the railway crossing. Now, before the train crosses, the crossing is not going to open, and still people would honk. In airplanes, just before just after the airplane comes to a halt after landing, a lot of people are in a hurry to get up and pull down their luggage from the overhead compartments. Why? If we can't wait for those 2-3 minutes, the example that we just took was 11 and a half years. Easy, difficult? That's where the emotions come in, the emotions of greed and fear. Now, when I do this, a friend of mine told me a beautiful example. He said, after listening to your presentation, I thought, yeah, I need a lot of patience. It's so important. So I went to the temple to pray to God. And I said, God, please give me lots of patience, because I can't get it on my own. So I prayed to the Almighty and I said, Lord, give me lots of patience. Please give me lots of patience. But please do it fast. That's ironical, but that's how a lot of people say, I can wait, I can wait, I can wait. But if if I can't wait, impatience is the enemy of compounding. The impatience does not allow that compounding to take effect. Now, in our investments, where do we falter? One is we pull out money a little too fast. We pull out money, especially when the markets are at a lower level. So we've started seeing that happening now. And every single time when the market falls initially, the investments don't stop. But it's just the waiting period where the investments investments stop and money start getting pulled out. So slowly and gradually, if the markets don't start another rally, we might see a lot of investors exiting, because that waiting period is something much more difficult than the fall to handle. Number two, a lot of times we pull out the dividends and do not reinvest that money. The money that is pulled out in form of dividend and spent somewhere, or interest that is taken and spent somewhere, is not invested. And what is not invested back, on that the compounding effect doesn't work. Impatience in either ways. A lot of people opt for dividend and then they don't reinvest back. So be very careful. Understand this power of compounding. The more you understand this power, the more it will work in our favor. Let's look at risk in another manner. And this is where early March 2020, just when the coronavirus threat was being discussed, and the municipal corporation in Mumbai had started putting hoardings about Corona se Darona. And what I saw was 3 boys sitting on a two-wheeler without a helmet, broke a signal, red signal, were going on the wrong side and going at full speed. 3 on a bike, red light broken, wrong side, full speed, and as you can see, none of them were wearing a helmet. But all 3 of them were wearing a face mask. Which risk are we more worried about? And I'm talking about the period before the lockdown started. So the coronavirus was not even taken that seriously during those days. But these people wanted to protect themselves against the virus, where the threat was not so much. But they were okay going on a wrong side, and they were okay with the risk of accident. What risk are we talking about? Which risk are we talking about? And why am I mentioning this? I'm mentioning this because in the equity markets, if you see equity mutual funds where the data is transparent, last 10 years data is very, very poor. Last 10-year returns in many cases are single-digit returns, less than 10%. So quite a few people have argued that, mutual fund sahi nahi hai, let me buy stocks. Which risk are we talking about? So mutual fund means there is a risk of equity market, number one. Number two, there is a risk that the fund manager can make mistakes. But the benefit that we get is we get a well-researched, diversified portfolio. On the other hand, if I myself buy stocks, it would be a diversified portfolio of well-researched stocks only if I have the capability, or if I know somebody who's capable enough to guide me. That's point number one. Point number two, in most individual portfolios, the portfolios would be highly concentrated in few stocks or few sectors. That concentration risk is also forgotten. So this is number one. Number two, once again, with equity markets in doldrums, Bitcoin has made a return. And people have started looking at Bitcoin, and Bitcoin again had another bull run in the recent past. So people are going for Bitcoin also. Are we even understanding the risk involved? And I'm not saying I'm against stocks or Bitcoins or real estate or mutual funds or anything. I'm not against anything. The only thing that I'm against is if I make a decision of investing my money somewhere, do I understand the potential downside? If I understand the potential downside, there is a possibility that I'll be able to take corrective actions. If I don't understand the downside, there's no way I can take any corrective action. And that's my point. all these biases do exist. So let's take, maybe I'll take around 5 or 7 minutes, Vinit and Manoj, why these biases exist. So first of all, our mind, and as one of the Nobel laureates, Daniel Kahneman says, there is a slow mind and there is a fast mind. So he says he's written a beautiful book called Thinking Fast and Slow. The fast brain is the reflexive brain, reflex actions that we take. The other is a reflective brain, where we think over what happens. We evaluate the pluses and minuses, etc. So that's the reflective brain on the left side and reflexive on the right hand side. Now look at these images. The moment there is a fire in a building, we don't have to wait for reflecting. There has to be a reflex action and we have to rush out of the building. If there is a snake coming our way, there's no way that I'm going to stop and analyze, okay, so, this snake doesn't appear to be poisonous. Poisonous snakes are like, oh, sorry, I have no such time, because the snake is not going to wait for my analysis to get over. In such case, I have to run. These are biological threats, threats to my existence. In such case, reflexive behavior is what is required. But there are certain other threats, because we are talking about the world of investing, the investment returns being poor, the investment not doing as well as I expected, or the investment delivering negative returns. These are not biological threats. These are psychological threats. This has nothing to do with my survival. This has something to do with changing my lifestyle at worst. And in such case, reflective action is warranted. The problem is, whatever the threat, biological or psychological, the chemicals which are released in the body are exactly similar. Exactly similar areas of the brains also light up and become active. And due to which it is difficult for us to consciously decide which action might be required at what point in time, and the subconscious takes over. And subconscious is the same, probably, again, I'm not a brain scientist. I've read a few things and I'm narrating based off out of that, but the subconscious is the stale reptile brain which the dinosaurs had, and it simply says, in the event of a threat, fight or flight. That's the response. What we need often is, if the prices are moving in a manner that we can't understand, we don't need to act. We simply need to sit down and try to understand and then take a decision. But these problems, as I already mentioned, that this is a reptile brain at play. It's an old problem, and how old the problem is, even in our Upanishad, this line is mentioned, Mana eva manushyanam karanam bandha mokshayoho, which actually says something loosely translated is the title of this program today. It's all in the mind. The mind itself is the reason behind bandhan and mukti, bandha mokshayoho. So mind is the reason behind bondage or freedom. How we use that mind, is it up to us, or is mind driving our behavior? So first of all, let's be aware that all of us suffer from biases, various biases. As we speak, have I gone through some, do I suffer from some biases? Yes. Do I assume a few things? Yes. My biases are shaped based on my previous experiences. Your biases are shaped based on your individual previous experiences. But all of us have some bias of some sort. If I'm aware that I'm driven by these biases, then I'm likely to behave in a slightly better manner. In my mind, these are the two shields against these biases. Difficult for me to see my problems, difficult to see somebody's problem. And exactly same thing applies to someone else also. So for that someone else, very difficult for him or her to see his own or her own problems, but for him or her, it's easy to see my problems. Uh, so I was talking to somebody the other day, and this person asked me, you must be investing your money yourself, right? I said, no, I take help of an advisor. I don't do it myself. He said, why? You are a trainer in this industry. You train so many advisors and you don't need help. I said, I may know technically, probably I know more than my advisor, but it's my mind, which is something that I need to control. And that's where an advisor can often, and it happens quite a while, quite a few times it happens that I get swayed. So I call up the advisor and say, क्या करना चाहिए इसमें? And the advisor simply says, कुछ और बात करनी चाहिए अभी, मार्केट के बारे में बात नहीं करनी है. Yeah, so that's the advisor's role. The advisor simply calms me down, and then we end up talking about the portfolio. We end up discussing a lot of things. And in majority of the cases, when I call up the advisor, depending on something, based on something, then we end up agreeing that no action is required in the portfolio. Most of the times. So you need that kind of a boring advisor actually. Because that boring advice is what aids the process of compounding. In the last slide, something which is very important, especially for people of younger age group, and it was applicable when I was younger. We want something, then we want it now. We want it fast, and it's popularly called instant gratification. And in that process, a lot of times, to want something now, we would compromise on what we really needed the most, or what was critical for our requirement. So needs are sacrificed for the wants very often. So this advice came from one of the great advisors. He says, don't give up what you want most for what you want now. Delayed gratification is often the answer to many of life's problems. So with that, we end the presentation, and let's take up the questions. Manoj, Vinit, whichever way you want to go. And I'll stop sharing the slide now.
Yeah. Thank you very much, sir, for this wonderful session. I hope it was enlightening for our clients to know about how you need to control your mind to become a better investor. So thank you for sharing that journey. So if anyone has any questions, put it in the Q&A section. So I've got two questions here. So first question is how to select a good company share to invest in, especially we are from other professions and not in touch with markets.
Yeah, so if you are looking at buying stocks by doing research, please consider that as a full-time job. It's stock research is not a part-time job, because let's just expand on that weighing machine analogy. The weighing machine says that if the company can remain profitable for longer periods, then the stock price should do well over a period of time. In order to identify such a company, it is important to understand the business of that company. It is also important to understand how the management is taking various decisions. If you have enough time to analyze and understand that, it could be a good idea to go further on that research. And then there are a lot of external threats. It could be from competition, it could be from the people's preferences, or it could be from government regulations. Do we understand those nuances? If we don't understand, then my sense is my request would be don't venture into buying stocks yourself. It is better to go to a professional fund manager. It could be a mutual fund or a portfolio management service, depending on what size of the portfolio that you are considering. But if you are from some other industry and do not have enough time, it's better to avoid buying stocks directly.
Thank you. The next question is, what do you suggest for new and late investors in late 30s?
Sorry, I just...
for a new and question? For new and late investors in late 30s.
Late investor. Okay, so that means somebody who did not start investing early. Okay, so yeah, for that, there's this beautiful saying which says the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, and the next best time is today. So if you didn't do it 20 years ago, or whenever you started earning, there's no time machine invented that you can go back to those years and start investing. No problems. Start investing right now. But what do you invest for, or why are you investing? That is a critical question. So list down your goals, and these goals are typically families' goals. And if I look at the Indian family system, generally we sit together and decide our the way we want to live life. All these goals are nothing but deferred expenses. So some large expenses to be incurred sometime in future, and for that we'll need cash flow. So for that purpose, we need to start investing right now. So identify your goals. These goals are a function of the kind of life that you are envisaging for yourself and your family. And then you start planning to invest for achieving those goals. But you can start anyway. Tomorrow is Sunday. So Monday morning, you can straight away start the exercise. Sunday would be better utilized in identifying your goals.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for that. Next question is, what about intraday trading? It may give decent returns in today's market, but the logic is against the compounding return process we just spoke about.
Okay. So, no, trading, to my mind, there is a full-time activity. It is a business that you're getting into. Instead of looking at the fundamentals of the business, you are actually trading by looking at, by anticipating the short-term price movements. Now, the entire session that I discussed was more for the passive investors who are not supposed to be spending too much time in the financial markets and spending a lot of time in their respective profession that they are in. Someone could be a doctor, somebody could be a corporate executive, somebody could be a teacher somewhere, or an architect or a chartered accountant. So if you're spending a lot of time in your respective job or profession, you don't have enough time to spend in the financial markets. A trader, by definition, is into the trade. So it is a full-time occupation. And in that case, different rules would apply. In any trade, it is about expertise in the trade that really helps. So let me take an example of, so I had read somewhere in one of the books, classic books that somebody had written. He had compared investing, you can add trading also into this. He had compared investing with the game of tennis. So let's say if I hardly know the game of tennis. So if I were to play a game of tennis with people similar to me, the amateurs, the only way to win the match is to ensure that I hit the ball properly and only keep it on the court, nothing else. And I simply have to, depend on the opponent to make an unforced error. But when a Roger Federer and Rafael Nadal or Djokovic, if they are competing against one another, then they would try to play the best of the shots. They would play the volleys and cross courts and whatnots. So for professionals, they have to try to win points. For amateurs, we have to try and not lose points. That's the name of the game. So if you are a full-time trader, then you better learn more and equip yourself to be able to play those volleys and cross courts and serve the aces. But if you are not a professional full-time trader, then you are a passive investor, and in such case, long-term investing a diversified portfolio, staying invested, taking help of mutual funds. These are the principles which are applicable in your case.
Thanks for that. Next question is, if you're near to our goals, is it advisable to be for only safe investments and not to go for high risk?
Absolutely yes. Absolutely yes. So you are near your goals. Now you reach the stage when you don't want to lose further. It's not about making that extra buck. So yes, 100% right. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Next question is, theory of being patient can't have specific defined period. One can't guarantee that. Say I invested for 5 years or 10 years. Now I want my expected return. Then it would be there accordingly. It's all about how you time it.
So once again, it's all about timing it. In hindsight, it's easy to know that getting out in January was a brilliant idea and getting back in March was another brilliant idea. Whenever you talk about timing, please understand that timing is about getting two decisions right. If you exit, then there has to be a re-entry also in time. If you exit at 42,000 and make a re-entry when the market goes up to 45,000, it doesn't really help. So it is all about getting two decisions right and keep on getting those decisions right. If you have a strategy to do that, try it out. If you don't have a strategy to do that, then staying invested is the only way. Having said that, does it guarantee that you'll always get the desired returns? There is no guarantee, and that is the risk in investments.
Okay. Few more questions. So what are your thoughts on the current state of real estate and gold as an asset class to invest in current times, especially from the post-COVID outbreak period?
So gold has behaved in a manner that I'm unable to understand, simply because I'm from a school of thought which looks at valuation of any asset by looking at the ability to generate income. Real estate can generate rental income, debentures and fixed deposits generate interest income, and stocks can generate dividend income. Gold does not generate any income. So in that case, it's difficult for me to understand how the gold prices would move and would not move. So I don't understand that part. Having said that, the gold has one particular characteristic, that it is always considered to be a safe haven. In that whenever there is turbulence in the markets for whatever reasons, economic, war, or there is a threat on the currency, gold typically tends to appreciate. So from that point of view, having some allocation to gold is not a bad idea. How much should be the allocation to gold? Because there is no cash flow from gold and you're only looking at price appreciation, don't invest too much into gold. That's what I would say. Maybe 5%, 7% should be good enough, but definitely not exceeding 10% of your total investment portfolio. Now, when it comes to real estate, there are two different views appearing right now. So I'm not getting into my view about the future prices of real estate. One view from the market which says that going forward, a lot more people would work from home, and to that extent, the real estate space should go out of favor and the prices should crash. The other school of thought says no, because there'll be social distancing. You will need more space per person, and to that extent, real estate prices should not fall. So I don't know which theory is right. Having said that, real estate has got some peculiarities. Number one, it requires large amount of money to be invested in a single investment avenue. Number two, liquidity is poor, and liquidity is essential at the time of getting out of the investment, not at the time of investing. When liquidating or when converting the asset into cash, so that liquidity is not so great, and very often it takes months before you can convert your before you can sell the property. Third, related to liquidity is you to sell the entire property. You can't break it into parts and sell it. So these are some issues. Now, if that's the case, can you diversify? Because it's large amount, difficult to diversify. But if you got a very large amount and you are able to diversify across properties, then you also need to go for geographical diversification, which means take one property in Pune, don't take 3 properties in Pune. But then instead of Pune, you also take one property in maybe Bhubaneswar or another property in Ludhiana. Then geographically also you are diversified. Again, I have no preference for Bhubaneswar or Ludhiana, but these are examples. But the moment you diversify that way, just imagine the challenge involved with management of the property. These are certain things that you need to keep in mind. And to that extent, in my mind, real estate scores low as an investment avenue simply because of all these hassles. And I've not even gone into the legal hassles or encroachment or any such issues, which could be risks applicable to other investments as well. So these are my views as far as these investments are concerned.
Right. So last 2 questions I'll take. I've got a few more questions, but I'll just pick last 2. So one question is, what are the qualities which we should look for in a good financial advisor?
2 qualities. Number 1, the financial advisor should have the courage to tell you that you are wrong. That's quality number 1. And quality number 2, the financial advisor should be able to explain the risks associated with investments. My sense is these 2 are the topmost qualities of a good financial advisor. Lot of times, we look for somebody who can generate outsized returns. My sense is that that's a good expectation to have, nothing wrong with it. But understanding the risks associated with that kind of investment avenue is far more important, because that allows you to decide how much risk that you can afford to take. So from that point of view, understanding of risk is important. Second, if you do not understand what is the risk, then how do you manage that? And entire subject of investment management is a risk management subject.
Right. Thank you, sir. The last question. There are a few more questions, but I'll take the last question. What do you suggest to a person who has a varied income that is not constant monthly income? How do you suggest he invest chunks of sum received on a varied timeline? Should he wait and time the market to invest at dips?
Okay. So first of all, when the income is uncertain, you can't, a lot of people say that you can't do an SIP, so should we time the market? My question is, the timing of your income, is it anyway related to the levels of the markets? No. So because the income is uncertain and the markets also follow a different path of uncertainty, when the markets are attractive, you may not have any income. When markets are very attractive, you may not have any income at that point in time. So it's quite possible. My thinking in that case would be, looking at your financial goals, try to maintain a proper asset allocation, and then keep looking at that asset allocation in terms of percentage allocation across different assets. So let me take an example of equity versus debt. And suppose that I started with 60% debt and 40% equity portfolio. So whenever I get that income and whenever I'm able to generate that surplus, I would look at that surplus amount and now look at my portfolio. 60% fixed income and 40% equity was the target allocation. Currently, it is 35% equity and 65% fixed income. Then I'll buy equity. If it is 55% fixed income and 45% equity, then at that point I'll buy fixed income, which means whichever is lower in terms of the target percentage, that is what I'll buy. And as you can understand, that's nothing but timing in another sense. Whatever is low, you are buying, and whatever is high, you are not touching. Now, because it is uncertain income, there could be a possibility that sometimes you do not have income for a period, but you still have to fund your expenses. So you need to pull out money from your investments. Once again, go back to that percentages, and whatever is higher than the expected percentage or the target percentage, pull money out of that. I think I would generally do it that way. So keep that percentage sacrosanct and try to rebalance back to that percentage by matching your cash flow, and you automatically time the market.
So one more question, if you're okay to take that.
Yeah, I'm fine.
It's a good question. Many times during market falls, when good companies also underperform, but at the same time, some unknown companies give profit. What's the mistake in choosing so-called rated fund or stocks?
Now, is this about the profits that the companies are making or the stock prices? So let me just look at both separately. If the market has fallen and the stocks of good companies have also fallen, you go back and check whether the fundamental strengths of the companies have changed or not. I'm right now talking about stocks because you also mentioned about funds. I'll come to funds also in a while. So go and check the fundamental strengths of the company. So let's say recently some of the banking stocks also took a beating, whether it was a good bank or a bad bank, simply because the NPA levels were bad. The whole finance sector was taking a beating. A couple of banks also got into trouble. So the whole banking sector was taking a beating. Now, does it mean that all the banks are bad? No, it's a sector specific problem which is impacting the bad and the good together. So that's quite possible. Now this is as far as the stock price is concerned. Now when it comes to the profit fall, actually go into details of the income pattern and expense pattern. Is there any extraordinary expense that has happened during this period? Is there any extra provisioning which has happened which has pulled down the profit, or the income has come down on account of something? Is it a conscious decision of the management to bring down the income? So now this requires a good amount of analysis of the business, and for that you need to understand the overall business structure that somebody is operating in. So that's the company. So get back to the fundamentals, understand the fundamentals, and then equate it with the stock price, and then take a call. When it comes to mutual funds, please do not go by the ratings given by people. The rating is nothing but the marks that a kid scored in the previous exam. It does not tell you anything about how much marks the kid would score in the future exams. So the ratings are based on the past performance of the fund. It does not tell you, it does not mean that a 5-star fund will always be a great fund and a 1-star fund will always be a laggard. There is no predictive power with the ratings. What do you look at in case of a good fund? Or rather, how do you identify a good fund? I typically look at, and I'm telling you my framework straight away. I typically look at a few subjective parameters rather than the cons or the numbers. What are the subjective parameters? The AMC, the asset management company or the fund house that you look at, the manager or the management team that is managing the scheme, and I also look at the universe in which it typically invests money. So if I'm looking at a large cap fund, I will not compare it with a mid cap fund. But even within a large cap category, if somebody is only looking at investing in 30-35 stocks versus somebody is looking at 50-60 stocks, both are very different. If somebody is buying and holding the stocks for a reasonable period of time versus somebody changing the portfolio in a short period, both are very, very different. Or on the debt side, somebody taking too much of credit risk or somebody not taking too much of credit risk, both are even within the similar categories, these are possibilities. So these are different parameters that I look at. So I look at the fund house, I look at the fund manager or the management team, and I also look at the way the portfolio is managed. And based on that, I arrive at my own understanding. Performance will come and go. There's no guarantee. I've already mentioned that earlier also, because there are thousands of factors which impact the performance of a portfolio. So I'll only look at things which I can identify and analyze, nothing beyond that.
Wonderful. So thank you so much, sir, for patiently answering those questions. I hope there were a couple of few questions because of paucity of time, I'm unable to ask them. So I'm just launching a poll for the session feedback. You'll see a pop-up. So kindly give your feedback about the session. I would appreciate. Okay, I'm closing the poll in under 10 seconds. So okay, so I'm ending the poll now. Okay. So thank you everyone for joining in and patiently attending the session. Thank you, Amit sir, for your wonderful explanation and taking our audience through the concept of being a patient investor. Anything, Manoj, you would like to add in?
No, I'm good. I think we can.
All right.
Thank you so much for this wonderful opportunity, Vinit and Manoj, and thanks everybody. I hope the session was useful to you all. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you very much.
So much, sir.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone. Have a good weekend. Thank you. We're ending the session now.